Okay, everyone, the Celtic Way Weekly, episode number 9, and a pretty quiet week of Celtic news. We are back to discuss that. We're on a bit of a high, John. Well, certainly you are, because we're just about an hour on from full time in the Falkirk game. We got 4 goals, an incredibly high XG, which I'm sure will have been music to Martin O'Neill's ears. And yeah, just a good evening, I think, despite what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I've been in a pretty dour mood about Celtic all week, I have to say,
You have
Hamish.
been,
And
yeah.
when you come into this, you wonder, am I just going to be a moan for an hour? But actually, everyone's catching me in a very good mood at the moment because tonight was more than just a 4-0 win for me. Tonight was a throwback to my youth. It was a throwback to simpler times in football when it's really just about Martin O'Neill, some guys in green and white shirts, and a lot of goals. And that's what tonight was for me. And now, I've always said, I've actually said quite consistently that there's been two managers at Celtic that make me think about football and think about Celtic in a different way. One of them was Martin O'Neill, and one of them was Ange Postecoglou, and that's why tonight was so special for me. It felt like a throwback to a time where we had a manager in place who I believed in so wholeheartedly that he makes me think differently about the game of football, about the way Celtic play, about everything. And I thought the simplicity that Martin O'Neill brought to Celtic against Falkirk was unique to him, but also in a modern age of football, which I think over time has become more complicated and more complex, was just thrilling to see guys kick a ball, get it forward, attack the other team, and stick it in the back of the net. That's what it's all about for me. And why I'm so pleased about it is because that's by design. That is Martin O'Neill's whole ethos, and I thought it just played out perfectly on the night. I accept there's lots of issues around Celtic at the moment. There's lots of problems. There's question marks about the viability of Martin O'Neill's interim, appointment. But tonight, none of it mattered for me. It was just a joyful night of real Martin O'Neill belief.
I mean, he's a total legend of a manager, presided over one of the finest teams we've ever seen. Just before I supported the club, so I'm kind of deferring to you a little bit. But to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, kind of that team kind of has a I don't know if it's mystical or mythical kind of
Mm-hmm.
feeling towards them because I only got to see it catch a few games back in those early days and just the incredible times. And Martin O'Neill was just the figurehead of that. So even for someone like me, it's incredibly surreal to have him back all of these years later. And my big question, I think, was, does he still have it? Does he still have the magic? Because you listen to, we've spoken to Jackie McNamara in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely loved Martin O'Neill. Spoke about the aura Martin O'Neill had, the feeling that he and his teammates, big players like Henrik Larsson and Chris Sutton and Neil Lennon would have when Martin O'Neill stepped onto the training ground. I was looking at I think Gabby Agbornlahor yesterday speaking about him at Villa and said the exact same word. He said he's got aura. And my big question when I was listening to all of that was, does he still have that? Does he still have that
Mm-hmm.
aura? Does he still have that magic all of these years later? Because he's a little bit different, I think, all these years later. It's been,
He
we can get
is,
into this,
yeah.
but it's been an interesting press conference yesterday and comments after the game. He's kind of not he's taking things seriously. He wants to win, but he's also,
Mm-hmm.
putting his own kind of spin in things these days. But he still does have that magic, doesn't he?
He's always been like that. He's always been a self-deprecating individual, which I
Yeah.
think is part of anxiety that he admits he has. He admitted he was very worried about tonight after the game. He admitted that he had real concern that he was going to let himself down. He was going to tarnish his legacy. He was going to let other people down at the club. And I think that just really sits within him. And I think when you're like that, I'm quite similar in a way. When you're like that, you're quite self-deprecating, and you take a lot of stuff with humour. And he's always been like that. And it was a little bit jarring this week, I think, in his initial press conference because it just felt like such a serious situation that Celtic were in. So when Martin O'Neill comes in and he's breezy and he's coming through like an uncle of sorts or a reminder of some of
Yeah,
my
yeah.
uncles or whatever, just coming in, having a bit of a laugh, it jarred a little bit for me, the tone of it all. But like that is Martin O'Neill in a bottle, and we're getting the full Martin O'Neill effect right now. And listen, I do think, even if this is for one night only, I think it was worth it just for a good old throwback nostalgia session. Even if it goes wrongly against Rangers, even if it goes wrongly in the next couple of matches, I think all of it was worth it for tonight because I just really enjoyed that. I just really enjoyed experiencing Martin O'Neill. It felt authentic to how I remember supporting Celtic under Martin O'Neill. And you make a good point, Hamish. When you talk about Martin O'Neill's teams, everyone talks about the players, the massive players that he had, the big players, the big personalities he had in the dressing room, Sutton, Larsson, Lennon. Everyone talks about the players, but at the time, it was all about Martin O'Neill. We came into Celtic and, on the crest of a wave of his own making with this aura of belief. And I felt that again tonight, and it was wonderful. And regardless of everything going on at Celtic right now, I'm pleased that people who didn't get to experience that at the time got to experience a bit of it tonight. And I'm just so delighted for him that it went well for him. I think part of my anxiety and why I've been so down in the dumps this week is I've been like, what if this goes wrongly for Martin O'Neill? I'm going to feel terrible about that. But it went well for him, and I'm just so pleased for him.
What specifically did you like about the performance against Falkirk?
Yeah, so I liked that it was more direct. I really noticed that. I liked that Celtic weren't afraid to give up possession because they had the intensity and a fight and a fire to win it back. And that's so crucial. I actually looked at this in Brendan Rodgers' last 5 games. I think Celtic averaged something like 68% possession, 67% possession. The last time they played Falkirk, it was 74% possession or in that ballpark. Tonight it was 58, 59. It was considerably lower possession, but Celtic's threat was much higher. As you say, they created more XG than any other team in the league this season. Celtic scored 2 goals for the first time in the Premiership this season. It's the most goals they've scored in the Premiership this season, their largest margin of victory. All of that counts. All of it is because I think Celtic were less afraid and less lost in their own thoughts. There was a simplicity to the game, and I really enjoyed that about the match. I could see Martin O'Neill's imprints all over it. And to be fair, I think Martin O'Neill showed deference to Sean Maloney after the fact as well. This wasn't just a Martin O'Neill thing. I think Sean Maloney's had a big hand in this over the last couple of days. But yeah, a simplicity in Celtic's play, the horseshoe of death that everyone's moaned about for so long, I didn't see much evidence of it. Obviously, Celtic have to recycle possession across the pitch, but most possession I thought had intent, Hamish, and that's really what the biggest thing for me was. It wasn't just possession for possession's sake, and I think that resulted in the threat that Celtic had in the box with Nygren moving closer to Johnny Kenny. I just thought was excellent as well. I know Nygren's, he is a divisive figure at times, but I just think in that box he is a threat. He's going to do something. It might not always come off for him, but he's going to try and do something. That's really what Celtic need at the moment.
Yeah, he had a number of really good passes through to Johnny Kenny, who finished well tonight. Do you like that one? No, I thought it was a significantly better performance. The numbers don't really lie. As you say, 4 goals. I think it was 2 goals in the first half for the first time, which this season in the league. I was thinking, poor Scott Bain. I think we've scored like 14 or 15 goals at home domestically this season. I think Scott Bain's been in nets for 8 of them, so he's not getting much luck. The big takeaway for me from the performance, it was, okay, maybe the first 15, 20 minutes wasn't great, but it was like a full match performance, and significantly, I thought we finished the match strongly. Like, how often in recent weeks have we seen Celtic play well for maybe 25, 30 minutes, but then kind of revert back to type? It felt to me like we finished that match strongly, and there was more of a kind of general performance there. I wonder how much of it is Martin O'Neill, how much of it is Sean Maloney, how much of it is just a new voice after Brendan Rodgers, because it's clear. I mean, we can get into all of the stuff that's going on, and it's clearly not all. It wasn't all Brendan Rodgers' fault. Far from it.
Far from it, yeah.
But I just wonder if that change of kind of voice they're listening to, or voices in the dugout, has had a big effect on things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And listen, I think a lot of it is about the players standing up as well and showing something about themselves as well. And, you hear anecdotes from O'Neill's first spell where players sometimes say, Martin O'Neill sometimes just said, you go and figure it out today. You go and figure out how to win this game. And he puts a lot of personal responsibility onto individuals. And what that does, I think, is it instills belief in each other as teammates. One of the great things about Martin O'Neill is he's not just a good individual motivator. He makes players believe in their teammates and makes them believe in the collective. And I really thought that was on show tonight. He also did the classic Martin O'Neill thing of throwing on a youngster towards the end with Callum Osmond coming on, which is just such classic O'Neill behaviour that it's refreshing as a throwback. Because how often have you seen we've been crying out for a manager to come along and throw in a youngster for time and again? It's Callum Osmond, like he's barely been in the team. It's his first time in a match squad since.
Is that like the Maloney impact as well, do you think?
Yeah. And Martin O'Neill was pretty famous for just giving people a wee bit of a chance, and regardless of whether they go on to become a player or not. And listen, I just think tonight was a good night. Tonight was a good night in a bad week, in a really bad week where I've been feeling pretty rubbish about Celtic, to be honest, Hamish. I didn't like the way it happened with Brendan Rodgers and all of that, and it was just a real breath of fresh air. Even Martin O'Neill's post-match press conference, we're saying it's not all Rodgers' faults, but his press conferences for the last few months have just been so dour and like really angsty, cryptic, trying to cover that with humour, but you can tell that he's fizzing and just kind of getting you down a wee bit. And again, Martin O'Neill, he reminds me of an uncle of sorts, and just comes in and is breezy and making jokes and going on about how you can't remember Marcelo Sarace's name and calling him the wee lad and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's just good part, and I just really enjoyed it.
I mean, that is a point that I wanted to raise, actually, having watched the press conference, Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney yesterday or whenever it was, and it was, you're right to bring up the fact that Martin O'Neill's humour at times can be a little bit jarring, especially when the press room doesn't necessarily know he's joking. But I thought there were a few really kind of good lines in there, but I just felt generally that it was really refreshing watching both of them being open and honest about matters. Like Sean Maloney especially, I think, because he's the one who had the information, but he was asked, I know, by the broadcast media, also by the written media, they did a separate thing afterwards, and he spoke incredibly openly about how tough a 24 hours it had been at Lennoxtown. I just felt that's just not something we'd have got previously from anyone at the club. And I realised that Brendan Rodgers was the only one that was speaking out on behalf of Celtic, so we weren't getting anything from anyone else. But it was getting to the stage where I was kind of really struggling with press conferences because you weren't sure exactly what you were going to get. And as you say, it was mixed messages. At times he was joking about things, and then at other times you knew that he was incredibly unhappy. I just found it, I actually sat back and really enjoyed that press conference, getting, even just for my own stuff on my own channel, getting really good information from Sean Maloney. Like he really gave good information about speaking to Cameron Carter-Vickers and Cameron Carter-Vickers' surgery and the impact, what Alistair Johnson has had on things, and the difficult stuff as well. And I think how tumultuous a few hours it had been for him finding out that he was going to be coming in, and then having to kind of go out and kind of put together his own backroom team, or Martin O'Neill's backroom team, making calls to Mark Fotheringham and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, obviously these two are not going to be here for long. They've both said that. Sean Maloney's going to go back to his previous job. Martin O'Neill's going to go back to doing whatever a 73-year-old does. But I think while they're here, at the very least, I think we're going to get honesty from both of them.
I agree with
and
that.
I think that's quite important.
Speaking to Graham Spears earlier this week, I was on Graham Spears' podcast and he was talking about Martin O'Neill, and we had a discussion about him. He knows Martin O'Neill very well. He's been kind of Martin O'Neill's go-to guy for doing these evenings with Celtic fans, etc. He's the host of the evenings, and he's become quite close with Martin O'Neill. And one of the things he said is nobody will be more honest about the situation or his situation at Celtic than Martin O'Neill is. And if it's not going well, Martin O'Neill will be the first to say to Dermot Desmond, look, go and get someone else. Go and get someone else in here and do this because I can't do it. And I enjoy that about Martin. I believe that about Martin O'Neill because I do think he has that integrity. I really, really do. And I guess that's really what underpins how I feel about him as a manager, and because I think everything he does has real credibility, because he lives and breathes everything he says. Nothing is a facade. Nothing is left to doubt, really. It is what you get from Martin O'Neill. You can tell when he's annoyed. I remember moments when he was in his first spell where he didn't always have a great relationship with the media, and there was moments where he had a tested relationship with the media, but he shows that. He doesn't hide it, and he doesn't hide behind anything. So I agree that honesty is key, and I think really that's what Celtic fans are looking for, isn't it? That's what the Celtic fans have been looking for since the summer, Hamish, is just someone to actually be honest with the support and tell us how it really is and what is actually going on at the club, good or ill. It doesn't always have to be good news. We don't always have to be sold a spun version of events that paint Celtic in the best light possible. We're all more grown up than that. And I do agree that Sean Maloney was good in that regard because he didn't sugarcoat how bad it was for the players and the staff at Lennox Town in the wake of Brendan Rodgers' exit.
And even the fact they've both ruled themselves out of wanting the job permanently, we know exactly where we stand with both of them.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I'm laughing because, it's one of those interesting situations because all of this, and we'll get onto this in a moment, all of this, it lives on the whim of one man, which is Dermot Desmond, and he can really do whatever he wants. And if he decides that they're going to stay on a bit longer, they will stay on a bit longer, regardless of how they feel about it right now, And that's really what it comes down to. And I just feel like Dermot Desmond's so changeable at the moment, or erratic to a degree in some of the actions that he's taken and some of the messaging he's putting out there, that actually I think anything could happen at Celtic over the next few weeks and months. I really, really do. I know a lot of people are saying, look, they'll be here for 3 games and then they're away. Look, I think that's the most likely situation, Hamish. I really, really do. But I cannot rule out them staying until the end of the season, for example, just because of how strange Celtic have been over the last 6 months or so, where what you feel like Celtic need and what Celtic do don't necessarily marry up. And so I understand they said that, but I'm also, there is a wee bit of part of me that thinks, well, what is the full situation here? I guess that's to play out.
Yeah. Monday night then was a hell of a night. Brendan Rodgers resigns from the job. Find out Martin O'Neill's coming back. That wasn't even the main headline, to be honest, because then that stinging, astonishing, whatever word you want to use, statement came out from Dermot Desmond that I think everyone has pretty strong feelings about. I mean, my main feeling here is why is Dermot Desmond using Celtic's website as his own personal blog here to say what he wants? A minority shareholder. So I've got big question marks over that and so many other things. But I mean, we've probably seen the footage of you reading it out live. I was similar on my channel. It took a bit of believing.
It took a bit of believing, and it just comes down to me that this. We've been under no illusions of this, Hamish. We were talking about this earlier in the summer, where Celtic is Dermot Desmond's thing, right? And people point to this minority shareholding and go on about it. The reality is that he has effective control of Celtic, and that number, that 34.7% or whatever it is just a number in an effective, realistic sense. Dermot Desmond has full control of what goes on at Celtic. And he can corral the rest of the shareholders to act by his will. Nobody's challenging them at Celtic. There's investment houses and all sorts of stuff tied up in Celtic that will do what Dermot Desmond says. I've no doubt about that. But that doesn't make it right that Celtic as an entity is so essentially directed on the whims and beliefs and from the statement that you put out, the insecurities of one man. And I just don't think Celtic should function like that. I think it's past time that it functions like that. And it's been disheartening this week coming to terms with the fact that really nothing's ever going to change at Celtic, even if you get a new manager in, someone who does well for a couple of years but then starts to expect more and starts to push and show a bit of ambition that aligns with the supporters. It's just all going to come crashing down again because there's a ceiling at Celtic where control is the thing. They like full control over everything, and some people will say that's fair to a degree, Hamish. I know there'll be comments under this saying Dermot Desmond's got it spot on this week. Look at what's happened. Dermot Desmond's done so well for Celtic. Look at the stability he's brought to Celtic. And I'm just like, I don't really care. I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of it because I just don't think Celtic as an entity and the way that it's run and the way that supporters so underpin the direction of the club should function like this. If Celtic were so reliant on the millions and billions that Dermot Desmond has, then I would maybe say that's a bit different, And he did buy the club and he did put his money into the club initially. But Celtic is funded by supporters on an annual basis. And I think in that situation, it makes it different for me. This isn't a club in the English Premier League whose money is all generated by TV deals and, as I say, like the billions of wealth of individuals or equity groups or all sorts of stuff, whether from the Middle East, from America or wherever. That's not what this is. And if it was that, then I would understand this to a degree. But given the way that Celtic are funded and so directly connected to supporters, I don't think it's right that Celtic should be running this way. Even if I admit, Hamish, and I don't actually know how you feel about this, but it was time for Brendan Rodgers to go. That was obvious.
I said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is the situation here, that Dermot Desmond is in control at Celtic. I think if that wasn't clear to people before this week, it is now, abundantly clear, and that is going to continue. And I think again that's kind of something that we've said, and to be honest, I think that's something like the collective, for example, are very aware of, which I'm guessing is part of the reason why they hadn't really targeted Dermot Desmond before this week. I know you'll have been delighted to see him in the imagery finally from the collective, and I know they kind of haven't named him by name in their statements, which again I just find a little bit strange. They call him the principal shareholder. There's obviously some reason for that, but I'm not sure. He's obviously not going anywhere, and even when he passes away or whatever, it's probably going to stay with the family. So you're going to have the Desmond family running this. So that's kind of where we are. Do we just kind of just playing devil's advocate, because I like to do that. Okay. Is it all that bad? Is it just bad at the moment because of how things have gone recently? Like we weren't complaining about this when Ange was in charge, really, were we?
No, we weren't, and that's a fair point. And listen, Dermot Desmond's been the person who decides grander strategy or managerial changes for a long time at Celtic, through success, through bad times, whatever. And I think I said on one of the videos we did that stability isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think what irks me is that he seems to choose to be involved when he wants to be. And I think just over the last couple of years it's become increasingly strange, the messaging from Celtic. Like the statement after the transfer window, the statement about Brendan Rodgers, when it starts getting to that stage, I just feel it starts to bring the credibility of Celtic into question, frankly, and then that starts to override the strength that a figure like Dermot Desmond can bring, because he does bring stability, and he does, under Celtic are in no risk of anything going bad financially or anything like that, and I accept that. I'm just wanting him to put a bit more football expertise at an executive level and have Celtic moving forward in a more progressive direction. And I actually don't think it's that big an ask, but for whatever reason, I think there's a stubbornness there. He has his own thoughts. And listen, I'm not trying to say this is how to run Celtic. I'm just coming from my own perspective of how I see Celtic functioning in relation to competitors around Scotland and around Europe, and the way that football is changing, and understand that the football clubs that are succeeding have real expertise to a degree that Celtic, I don't feel, have. And that's really the crux of my issue. And it's really, if Dermot Desmond started to put that in place, I would have far less problem with the entire endeavour. For me, the problem is that he seems to swan in from now and again, put out a mental statement or something happens. It just leaves Celtic in a bit of a basket case, and then who picks up the pieces? Where's Michael Nicholson? Where's the rest of the Celtic board? And if Celtic had that strong leadership in place alongside Dermot Desmond, again, it would be far less of an issue. But they don't. They don't have strong leadership in that board. The fact that Michael Nicholson has been missing this week, I think, is one of the most absurd things about this situation.
Yeah.
Like, where is he, Hamish? He's not put his name to anything. He's not said anything. He's supposed to be the chief executive of Celtic Football Club.
Yeah, I mean, it is astonishing. I mean, there's a lot of astonishing things this week. I couldn't believe when that statement went out that there was nothing from Michael Nicholson. There's been nothing from Michael Nicholson in recent days. Even literally anything from Michael Nicholson. Anything. I'm not even talking about an interview. I'm talking about comments on the website. We'd like to thank, Brendan Rodgers, whatever. The fact we didn't hear from the club that John Kennedy had left in, a good, whatever it was, 36 hours until they did it yesterday. it comes across like Celtic are being run by one man, and that probably is a large degree of truth in that. But I just find it because Celtic have this weird contradiction going on in terms of how they kind of do business and speak publicly. They clearly value discretion and keeping things in house and not reacting to every ebb and flow, and that's fine. But it leaves us not hearing from them for months. But then occasionally, and they're getting more frequent now, you get these remarkable statements where it's honestly like they've been written by like a raging teenager. And I genuinely mean that. You know what I mean? It's like you want to say to Dermot Desmond, take 5 minutes, step away from the keyboard. I know he doesn't write it himself, but step away from the keyboard and relax and a few deep breaths, because that statement, like, as I think, was it you said the other night, or maybe it was Stevie said to me, if that had come from that Nottingham Forest chairman, it would have been pretty believable.
Yeah.
But you wonder if we've got an even more remarkable kind of, I know he's not an owner, but whatever at the club.
That contradiction is really a good point, Hamish, of that kind of let's keep our cards close to our chest, let's not give anything away. We can't give away confidential information about employees. We can't give full explanations of this because we can't give away competitive advantages and all that. And then what? You just put all your dirty linen out for everyone to see and just let everyone pick apart it and go, wait a minute, what's going on here? So you have been lying to us for the last 3 months. Like Michael Nicholson literally said to the Celtic Fans Collective in that meeting that they do not accept that there's a schism between Brendan Rodgers and the board. And then Dermot Desmond 2 weeks later puts out a statement where he says we've hated him for months. Like we've just really not been getting on with him for months, and it's just like it's just absurd.
How daft does that make Michael Nicholson look as well?
Makes Michael Nicholson look bad. And listen, Hamish, I think if you go back and read the statement after the transfer window, it makes that look absurd as well, where they try to pin all of it on the media and all this speculation and all this kind of nefarious reporting, when in reality the reporting and the rumours and everything that around Celtic at that time turned out to be true based on Dermot Desmond's own words on Monday. And again, you're totally right to note this serious contradiction at the heart of Celtic. And I think when there is such a contradiction, you can't really trust the actions, and it makes everything look more erratic. And that's really what I'm trying to get at. Celtic should have a structure in place where the erratic nature of a minority shareholder does not affect the trajectory or the standing of a football club. It's just absurd, again, when the finance is so underpinned by regular supporters on a day-to-day, month-to-month, annual basis.
Should the collective's protests be centred on Dermot Desmond going forward? Are the other guys kind of irrelevant in this?
I think so too. Yeah, I do. I get it. I get their stance on it, and that yes, there's more achievable targets. And look, if they manage, look, Peter Lawwell is naturally coming to the end of his time at Celtic, just naturally, I think, regardless of the circumstances. So then it's like, well, if Peter Lawwell goes, then it could be seen as a victory, and like you're pushing for change, and then there's maybe a momentum in change. And I understand that. My personal belief is if people really are wanting to have a fight, like if this protest group really does want to pick apart what the core of Celtic is, then I don't think you can ignore Dermot Desmond as part of it. And listen, people, I said last week, there's been a fair amount of criticism of the collective. They've had some good points. I still don't think they've found their feet as a unique entity, and that's really what I'm waiting on. I'm waiting on, I think, maybe the steering group or someone to have a more kind of formal look at things. It still feels a little bit like a collection of ultras groups and various others, and that's just the feeling I get from it at the moment. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in the early stages, but I really do think it needs to start to move towards this more formal arrangement of kind of, as I've laid out, a sort of fan advisory board to an extent, but someone who can credibly push the club in a direction, even if they're not wanting to head in that direction. Right now, there's a lot of protesting, and I understand you need that to gain attention, but I'm still waiting for the next phase of all this and how the collective develop. That's not necessarily. It's not necessarily a criticism of the collective, Hamish. It's more just this is still in the very, very, very early stages.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe people have been expecting too much too soon from him, and that's part of the problem. But it's so early that I think even they're still finding their feet on all of this, and that's natural and to be expected. And we really need to see what the focus of their fight will be. And you think to an extent, what is this governance stuff? Is this realistic? Where they kind of point out governance flaws, and then what Celtic get chided by an organisation? Is Dermot Desmond really going to care about that? For me,
Does he
the
care about
only real
anything though?
yeah, that's what I mean. And so the only real tangible change is if somehow people are found or sourced that can effectively buy someone out of their shareholdings. And until those people are found, and people with deep enough pockets are found with that motivation to do so, then I think all of this really just starts to look like just protesting and making clear displeasure rather than it having any tangible change. And again, that might be depressing for some people to come to terms with, but Dermot Desmond's not for moving, and I think that's the reality, frankly.
And a reminder, I've not got the direct quote, but it was something like, if I believe in something and a million other people believe in
Yeah.
another thing, I'm still going to go for my thing. That's always the quote I've got in my mind with Dermot Desmond. I must say, I feel a bit better about things this week. Obviously, I mean, it's been a really, it wasn't a good thing that happened on Monday, and we've
No,
not
it wasn't.
even mentioned Brendan Rodgers. You know, a terrific manager for us, and it's all ended pretty horribly, to be honest. And I think as time goes on, I think Brendan Rodgers will be remembered as an excellent Celtic manager, one of the greatest managers we've had. I don't think that's controversial. A real shame that it ended like that. We can linger on this point for a second, then I'll make my point. But just in terms of Brendan Rodgers,
My thoughts on Brendan Rodgers were that I think he is culpable for some of the stuff that has gone wrong at Celtic. Not just the on pitch stuff, but some of the off pitch stuff too. It doesn't particularly sound like he has covered himself in glory, particularly with his relationship with the board and kind of how they've functioned. It seems to me like there was two opposing camps just really entrenched in their own views, and there was no one just really reaching out and taking leadership on that issue. Where in the past maybe some people have. I think the irony is from some of the reporting going around today is that Brendan Rodgers started to try to make those advances and start to show that kind of leadership, and that's really what threw things to a head because he sought discussions and then the discussions went poorly, kind of thing. I had come to terms on Monday night with before he went that it was. I mean, we effectively covered it on this show last week, Hamish. We had a show about Brendan Rodgers' future, and you don't do that if you think a manager really has a future at the club. And I didn't expect it to unravel so quickly. I'm disappointed that there was so much vitriol around it. I don't think that was necessary. I think all Celtic needed to do was just go, look, this isn't working. You've done really well, but it's clear it's not working. We need to both move off in different directions. See you later, goodbye. Instead, it was just done in this shambolic way to the degree where you feel sorry for Brendan Rodgers, even if you acknowledge it definitely was the right thing for him to leave Celtic in that moment because Celtic were not moving in the right direction. They weren't functioning on the pitch, and now has become apparent they definitely weren't functioning off the pitch, Hamish, with Brendan Rodgers in place. And in that scenario, the only thing you can do is to change the manager. So yeah, while I feel sorry for him, it was definitely the right thing for him to leave.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like I do, despite what's happened, sitting here right now, I feel better about this season than I did after the Hearts game or after the Dundee game. I mean, we'll never be able to prove this, but I felt like under Brendan Rodgers we were heading for failure this season. I think the wheels were starting to come off. I didn't see any signs that he was going to be able to turn it around. And he spoke about himself being motivated, and that's fine. I'm never going to say that's untrue. Like I do actually believe him that he was motivated, but the key was that he couldn't motivate the players clearly, and that was the big issue. So I felt when we were talking a week ago, I honestly felt so down. I just felt like we're heading nowhere this season. I felt we were just effectively wasting away this season, and we were going to fall off a cliff and potentially not win anything, and then Brendan Rodgers would maybe be sacked February or March again, and we'd have John Kennedy until the end of the season. So sitting here right now, I think our season has a chance now. Martin O'Neill's going to be in charge for however long you want to say. And hopefully we're going to appoint a new manager kind of international break at the latest. That is my hope at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be excitement there again. I know all of these off-field things are going on, and there's so much wrong at the club. Clearly, you only have to see that statement from Dermot Desmond to tell you everything. But I do feel like there's hope now for this season, and I felt pretty hopeless before then. I know you're not particularly happy and you've been pretty down, other than Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney. But how do you feel about the rest of the season at the moment?
That's a fair point. It's actually not something I've considered much this week, to be honest with you, and that I do think effectively Celtic are in a better position now than they were on Sunday after being defeated by Hearts, and everything was just a bit of a mess. I do believe that, so I accept that. That's a reason for optimism. I think the irony of all this is that Dermot Desmond's actually picked some pretty good managers over the years, and he does look for a certain quality within a manager of steeliness and integrity that I think is crucial to be a Celtic manager. And so however the next guy comes in, he needs to have those qualities. He needs to make people believe in him. And he needs to have the ability to be able to do that. That's so key as a Celtic manager. Basically, it's maybe the most key thing. Like, that if he needs that belief, he needs the support to come with whoever the new manager is. So it's going to be really interesting to see who comes in. It really does depend on who has that about them and how they determine who has that within them. And again, that's one of those intangible things that lives in Dermot Desmond's brain, and for better or worse. So in terms of the direction of Celtic season, I think there's still big doubts because I think the squad is deficient, and I think that's the reality of it. And I think, to be fair to Brendan Rodgers to a degree, I think that has always been very much part of his reality too, that the squad is deficient, and I don't think it's fixed in this January transfer window. In fact, if you look at the squad now, it's probably going to become a bit weaker because I think Daisameda is off as soon as you can get out of Glasgow. So that naturally makes the squad weaker. Unless people start to really come into a game, then I do start to struggle to see where Celtic really turn this round to the degree where we're so excited on a consistent basis about Celtic and energised about the team. But that doesn't mean I also don't think I think Celtic can win the league, even if they're not a great Celtic side this season. I think they could win the league this year. And I think that's really what this year comes down to, Hamish, I suppose. I think you almost write off European ambitions and just go, like, this one's about winning the league and getting back Celtic to a stable position and then moving forward from that point for any new guy coming in. I also struggle to agree, but while I say Dermot Desmond's picked some good managers in the past, there have been managerial searches in the past that have gone very wrong. You know, one of them in the Eddie Howe thing. And just I'm also a little bit frightened that a scenario starts to appear like that, and then Celtic, the limbo starts to set in again. So I definitely have concerns, Hamish. But I do agree with your overall point that it's better that this has come to a head quickly rather than going on for too long.
So who are we wanting? Who's top of your list at the moment? So we've just in terms of an update, I think it's been reported that Ange Postecoglou is wanting a break from football. I think David Friel was reporting that. I don't think many people thought that was a possibility anyway, because Ange doesn't tend to go back. Kieran McKenna, is he on your mind?
He is on my mind just because I know that Celtic admire it. I know that Celtic have admired him for a long time. I think he's been spoken about as a future Celtic manager within Celtic for years, literally years. And so when you think that, you always consider, you've been looking at his career for over the last couple of years and considering how well he might do in Scotland. I know some people have these reservations about some of these managers that come from what is at the moment a mid-table championship side. But I think it's important to know that Kieran McKenna was a transformational manager for Ipswich. And that's something that Celtic like to seek out, a manager who can come in and transform the whole feeling around the club. I think Kieran McKenna has evidence in his past that he's done that. And I actually think if he doesn't come to Celtic, he's going to end up in a big job in England at some point. The hesitation with Kieran McKenna is I just don't know how realistic it is. There's a lot of talk about his wages and his contract and all of that. I think it could be an expensive endeavour. Beyond that, Hamish, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm not actually a big fan of the managerial race, the managerial expectation where there's 8 names on a list and you kind of got to go with one. Like when it's that, when the field is that spread, I sometimes find it difficult to understand who I actually want. Then it starts to, when it comes down to maybe 2 or 3 guys or one guy, you start to find out a lot more about them. That's when you start to determine. That's how it happened with Ange, if you remember. When Ange came in, we kind of learned a lot about Ange before he was even appointed. So by the time he was announced, I felt like I knew everything about him, and then that's when you start to understand the candidate. So it's actually really hard for me to say who I want, but I don't. I know that's a boring answer, but what are your thoughts on kind of where you want Celtic to go here?
Yeah, I think Kieran McKenna for me, just I think massive similarities to, ironically, Martin O'Neill back 25 years ago. Obviously, the nationality, the kind of what he'd achieved in the English game. I think Martin O'Neill was maybe in the Premier League at that point, but Kieran McKenna's been there.
Yeah.
And I just think he just feels like a very Dermot Desmond type appointment. It feels incredibly Celtic. Obviously, as you say, there's complications there with the compensation. I don't see why the compensation is a major issue, because we've spent that kind of money on several kind of below par players over the years. So for a manager, it wouldn't appear to be much. But for some reason, it kind of gets into people's heads that it's a major issue. And there's been other names. I mean, Craig Bellamy has been mentioned. Not sure about that.
Yeah.
Nicky Hayen, the Club Brugge manager.
I know that a lot of people like the Bellamy thing. I know Tony Haggett is a big fan of Craig Bellamy, and as it was said even like a couple of weeks ago that you might want Craig Bellamy to come to Celtic. I think my kind of concern with Craig Bellamy, he's not really had a club job of no, and I think it's a different thing managing a country compared to a club, especially a club like Celtic. I'm not questioning his character or his ability to shoulder that pressure, but it would be massive for him to come. I don't know. I just don't know if there's enough of a body of evidence there to suggest that he could cope with what Celtic is. There's been talk about Robbie Keane. I don't fancy that.
No.
But these are all very Dermot Desmond characters, aren't they? Like you can see there's a type being sought out here of someone who has name value, which I think is quite important to Dermot Desmond, and has flirted with football in England as well, and has been a big name down there. That has always been a consideration as well with Dermot Desmond. So there is a type here. I'm actually very intrigued about who it could be.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. And as I say, when the field's so spread, I can't really look at it and say there's a standout guy there that I'm just waiting for Celtic to unearth. I'm not convinced by anyone at Club Brugge or anyone at Bodo Glimt, not because I don't rate them as manager and don't think they could be good. I just think the environments that they're in are far more productive and conducive to success and supportive of a manager than what is in place at Celtic, and that would be a big red flag for me. It's nothing against Knutsen or anyone, it's just that they have a very strong support system within the clubs that they are currently functioning. We know that Club Brugge's model is very aggressive, their transfer model is very aggressive. Brendan Rodgers speaking quite openly about the fact that you wish Celtic had a transfer model akin to Club Brugge. And so when you're in that environment, I think it's a little bit easier. And also, I frankly think the pressure at Celtic is just so intense that it takes something beyond what I think we'll ever determine what a manager can be. I really do think it comes down to who can convince someone in the room that they have the stuff. Because if you looked at Ange Postecoglou on paper, Hamish, you probably wouldn't give him a hope. But imagine if you had a half an hour conversation with Ange Postecoglou, you would, no doubt about it, go, this guy is a slam dunk Celtic manager.
And we know Dermot Desmond goes off that, because the comments from Andy had a FaceTime or whatever or a Zoom call with Dermot Desmond, and Dermot Desmond made his mind up right away. So we know that intangible feeling, that impulsive feeling, I guess, is a big thing for Dermot.
And I think his instincts on that kind of stuff have been decent to an extent over the years. And so that's what makes all of this, when we're complaining about Dermot Desmond, I think the fact that Dermot Desmond recognises on a Zoom call with Ange Postecoglou that he could be a fantastic Celtic manager, I think it's actually a credit to Dermot Desmond, to be fair to him. And who is going to be the guy that has that moment with Dermot Desmond? And I'm looking at all the names and listening. Frankly, I don't know enough about any of them as people to know about who can be that convincing person. But that's what they're going to have to be if they won this job.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Just that point you made earlier about the squad potentially being, weaker coming out of the January window. I'm just got in my head. I wonder, as a kind of get it up you to Brendan Rodgers, whether Celtic are going to spend big money in January.
See, again, this is my problem, Hamish. I actually genuinely don't think the intent wasn't there this summer. I just don't think they knew how to do it, and that's been my biggest problem about.
You don't
all
think
this.
Brendan Rodgers was an issue in all of this?
That is the theory, isn't it? It's almost a conspiracy theory, like they're holding back because of Brendan Rodgers. I genuinely feel like they don't have the expertise in that building to effectively manage a transfer window to the extent where they've got players lined up and spend millions and millions of pounds in January. Could be very wrong about that. It's just my gut feeling on it. And then I'm just looking at some of the players who went away and think, what's going on here? And I do actually wonder about a manager in that situation and who wants to come into a situation mid-season. I mean, Ange always spoke about that, how he likes to be at a club. He hates coming into a club mid-season. Look, he was right. Look what happened when he went in at Nottingham Forest. It was a complete disaster. And I think part of that is because he didn't have that period of bedding in that is really crucial to a figure like Ange. And that's going to be difficult for a manager. And I'm just thinking, I'm just theorising, what if Martin O'Neill wins the next 3 games? What happens in that scenario? Are Celtic actually better off waiting until the end of the season and going from there? That will be consideration if Martin O'Neill continues to do well, I think.
I think the squad is clearly struggling. I think things can improve quite quickly, though. I mean, we even saw evidence of that against Falkirk. I just think, as I say, listening to a new voice, a kind of fresh impetus from a new manager. And you know what these managers are like? They all back themselves to be able to make an instant impact. And I do think Celtic will spend a bit of money in January. Maybe I'm just looking at this from a more positive slant. But I just kind of hope this goes well. And I just hope it's a big appointment and a good appointment and someone who can really take us forward. And I know all of this nonsense in the background is still going to be there, and it's still going to be, people are going to be drawing attention to it rightly. But in terms of on the pitch stuff, I do see a reason to feel kind of a bit invigorated here, because I genuinely, as I said before, I felt like we were heading for catastrophe under Brendan Rodgers this season. I honestly saw no hope, and now I see hope on the pitch, at least, certainly not off it.
There's no doubt in my mind it was a COVID season. That's what it was. That's what it felt like. That's what the evidence of it was, that was going in that direction. And if Celtic had limped on till March and then said goodbye to Brendan Rodgers, the situation would be far worse. So this is like the COVID season if Neil Lennon had gone at this stage, which is what everyone wanted to happen at that point. So let's see where it goes from here and whether this is good or not. Even, as I said, if my optimism around this is for one night only, then that's fine. We've not even talked about Rangers, Hamish, and I don't really want to because there's so much going on. I think we've covered all the good topics tonight and we're running out of time. But that Rangers game is so massive, and again, that could just be a thing that totally deflates everything that we're talking about tonight, because it's a huge match, and they've started reasonably well under Danny Rowe, and it's another match where it's exciting because you don't know what's going to happen. Going into the Hearts game was exciting because you didn't know what was going to happen. Obviously, it ended disastrously, but there's this element of an unknown. I think is essentially a healthy thing for a football fan to experience. I think things have been so predictable for Celtic over the last few years that the fandom it's been in an unhealthy place in terms of expectations and how people feel about Celtic. I think going back into the unknown generally, whether it's managers, Martin O'Neill, how we'll play against Rangers, even if it can go badly, I think the element of an unknown is a far better place and a more exciting place to be, frankly.
I think it's a proper 50-50 game on Sunday.
Totally.
I still think we have better players. I don't think they're playing particularly well, but it feels like they're kind of on the start of a journey under their new manager, and they're kind of united at that club, certainly in terms of their fans and their players and management, if not the boardroom. It just kind of feels like, well, clearly we're kind of not on that journey yet. We're kind of in an interim period. That's my big concern for Sunday. Do they have that collective feeling that's just a bit stronger, especially when you're not going to have like the ultras and stuff in our end on Sunday? I just think it's got the kind of makings of a tough one. I'm not confident for Sunday, but I really wouldn't be surprised if we won either. I think it genuinely is a 50-50 game.
I agree with everything you said. So I won't add too much onto it. It's a big game.
Okay, we'll be back next week, I think, to look back in things. But for now, we'll head off, and we'll thank you very much for watching. We really do appreciate all the views we're getting on this still relatively new show. I feel like a hell of a lot has happened since we started, but things will maybe calm down at some stage. But we'll certainly keep going with the shows. Please make sure you're subscribed to the Celtic Way on YouTube as well. It's much appreciated. Check out the lots of stuff going up on the website, and we'll catch up with you again very soon.